everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome back to another video. One of the biggest, most important things that Harry and Meghan lack is foresight. They have the absolute inability to foresee the consequences of their actions and the long-term repercussions of them. They are completely blind to how everything they do now will be affecting them in the future. One such case is this article that is still haunting Meghan Markle to this day, and that is the cover that she did and the interview that she did for The Cut magazine by Allison P Davis, who is a feature writer for New York Magazine and The Cut, and had a really negative experience afterwards. She basically, I guess, got fired after this. The rumors are that Meghan Markle was unhappy with the article and how she came across in the article, and she made some phone calls, and then next thing you know, Allison P Davis was basically done and out at her job. That is the rumor. Needless to say, it was a really negative experience for Allison P Davis, unfortunately. But let's take a look at this article and why exactly it is still popping up as a problem for the Meg, even though it happened a few years ago. Meghan of Montecito, the title reads. She's left the firm behind. Harry's found a polo team in Santa Barbara. The kids are doing great. Now she's ready for her next act. Well, we're still waiting, aren't we? We're still waiting to see something come of Meghan Markle and her lofty aspirations. So the article begins with an anecdote about Archie running into the room and Meghan, giving him a moment of her time. And this kind of opening paragraph here really personifies one of the main problems that stood out with this article. And that is that it came across really pretentious and self-indulgent for Meghan, made her seem snooty, and it didn't paint a very appealing picture of Meghan. And one of the first introductions here is Meghan, relaxing in a cozy chair, gazes over all that is climate-controlled and high-ceilinged and sun-dappled and perfectly marshmallowy and hers. I mean, that alone sounds a little pretentious, like Meghan is looking down her nose at the interviewer. And I'm not 100% sure that the writer meant to have it come across this way. Some people think that the writer sort of did create this sort of picture in an almost sarcastic-y sort of a way to sort of show Meghan's attitude and vibe the way it really came across to her, which was probably a little bit uppity and whatnot. But maybe she just honestly was trying to make it seem like normal, or like this is just what I'm seeing and I'm just writing what I'm seeing, but it came across really pretentious to the readers. Then in the lull in conversation, Meghan turns to me and leans forward to ask in a conspiratorial hush, "Do you want to know a secret?" Meghan, silenced no more, looks around, making sure nobody who would be listening is listening in. Then the top secret drop, "I'm getting back on Instagram," she says, her eyes alight and devilish. What? So over the top, so silly, clearly acting. Meghan is acting even when she's being interviewed by somebody. She just can't give it a rest. She can't just be normal. But also, this was years ago and she's still not back on Instagram. So I have no idea why this was included. I have no idea why Meghan would think that this was newsworthy or a big deal or something worth putting in her interview. It's just dumb. I think it may have been an attempt at putting out a feeler to try to stir up interest and then be like, oh, now I'll go back to Instagram because people will come and subscribe right away or follow me right away. Because for Meghan, being higher in narcissistic traits, it would be embarrassing for her if she didn't gain record-breaking amounts of followers the second she launched her Instagram. And so maybe this was a way of her trying to feel out the temperature, and it wasn't good, so she's delayed getting back on Instagram. Thank goodness for us all. Throughout the article, there are some signs that the author is aware of Meghan's sort of just mediocre career, because, for example, she describes the TIG as just moderately popular. She's not as gushing as some of the writers, journalists Meghan and Harry have indulged in interviews with in the past. For example, Bryony is over the top celebratory of Harry and Meghan in a way that comes across as false and fake and leaving out huge chunks of the story and biased. Same goes for the woman who covered them in Colombia. Very, very biased, very, very empty of real information, just didn't do a great job. Sharing only glowing reports when you're supposed to be interviewing somebody and being a journalist is going to come across as biased. And I don't think that this author comes across as biased because she does give realistic evaluations of what's happening, which is good. One of the first quotes we have here is Meghan griping about the photo release policies that were in place when she was with the royal family. Ever heard of private text messages or private emails or private WhatsApp threads with your loved ones? You don't need to be posting it on social media for it to be shared with the people who love your child. Duh. Also, you can have a private Instagram and share it only to the people, like DM things to only the people that you want to share a picture with. So I do not see the problem here. Also, this is very inconsistent with Harry and Meghan's privacy gripes. They're constantly complaining and whining about wanting privacy. And then she's cranky that she can't just post whatever pictures she wants on social media. It makes no sense at all. A lot of this just comes across as sort of spiteful. Like the Kensington Royal account, which she joined very temporarily, that was axed very quickly because Meghan doesn't play nice with others. But it seems like Meghan had a degree of spite towards not being able to have her own Instagram or have control over it. But really, when you think about it, that's a really small sacrifice, especially when you say you want privacy. Not being able to just post pictures willy-nilly is a small problem to have. It just doesn't really make sense that she's complaining about this. Next, they discuss the constant bullying that was taking place, which isn't really, but they're discussing it in the context of Allison, the author, being interested that Meghan is willing to go back on social media after having said that she was unhappy with, feedback from online outlets. And she says that Meghan being willing to get back on Instagram at this juncture, which we now know not to be true, was a lie, it was proof that she and Harry have made it to the other side of all the drama that defined their past 3 years, defined by their own doing. They created all this drama. They made all of this stuff a problem, and they created this image for themselves. But still, we have nothing. They still have not come back onto social media, which I think is good. I think that Harry and Meghan should stay off social media, especially with how they talk about social media. It would be really rather hypocritical at this point for them to start using social media for their own financial gains or business purposes because they only talk negatively about it. Next, they start discussing archetypes, where the synopsis says, each episode features her in conversation with her famous friends, which is a big reason why it flopped. People don't really want to sit around listening to arguably bland and boring conversations amongst rich, famous people who are very far removed from everyday people's realities, not talking about anything interesting in their personal lives. But it says here they were going to discuss the ways in which women are unfairly labeled and experience Meghan notes she has been through herself and is finally ready to talk about. Later, Meghan would relay she was no longer sure she would actually return to Instagram. Then why mention it at all? Why bother at this point? How ridiculous. Also, why would you build a podcast? Like, we already know the podcast flopped. Spotify dropped it immediately, called them grifters, said they weren't hardworking. All sorts of drama came out of Archetypes. It was terrible. It was just a flop in every way, and they didn't do a good job, tried to take credit for other people's work, stuff like that. But why would you build a podcast around talking to other famous people who are also wealthy about ways in which they're unfairly labeled? How ridiculous. It just comes across as wallowy self-pity from the rich and famous, and just doesn't make for very good listening. It's not something the public is going to want to listen to. Generally speaking, we don't want to hear people complaining. It's not fun, especially when you know that they're privileged. It's not interesting. Though she has been media trained and then royal media trained, and sometimes converses like she has a tiny bachelor's producer in her brain directing what she says, at one point in our conversation, instead of answering a question, she will suggest how I might transcribe the noises she's making. She's making these guttural sounds, and I can't quite articulate what she's feeling in that moment because she has no word for it. She's just moaning. Well, if that isn't a good slogan for Meghan and Harry in general, I don't know what is. It's just ridiculous and cringy. How awkward also for this poor writer. It really does point to how controlling Meghan can be, though, that she even thought this was an appropriate approach to take or an appropriate thing to say. That's a direct quote of something she said to this interviewer, that suggesting how she might write these noises, like what? And clearly the writer decided not to include any of that segment because I've read the full article. There is no mention of this moment with the sounds and what it was referencing. But it not only comes across as contrived and over the top, it's just generally unappealing because it comes across as really overbearing and controlling. Apparently, she's that way with everything, not just Harry. She's bossy. She's telling people what to do. She's telling this writer whose profession is to write how to write about this interview. It's never a good idea, but Meghan is blind to this and just seems to think that these types of things are all right. The next paragraph begins, Meghan's journey from deal or no deal suitcase girl to princess, I take issue with. She is not a princess. Calling her a princess makes no sense. That's inaccurate. Another contradictory statement. Meghan tells Allison that the couple had been asking for help in relieving Meghan's declining mental health. When those talks went nowhere, there were even more clandestine conversations with a network of rich and powerful friends that led to an escape to Vancouver Island for a 6-week holiday. And that turned into something far more permanent. Now, this is a different version of events to what she said in Oprah and in Netflix. So once again, we have more lies or just fudging of the truth. It's next revealed that Harry took issue with and declared the term Megxit to be misogynistic. How is that misogynistic? It was about Meghan leaving, Meghan exiting, and Meghan was in part to blame for it. I mean, the media does that with everything. We did Brangelina and all sorts of things like that. That's just what the media does. I don't think that's misogynistic in the slightest. And then she does acknowledge that they were going to go make their own money, though Prince Charles provided some financial assistance for the first year. They were left sans public funding to bankroll both their lives and the security that protected those lives. Calm down. And the press had just leaked the location of the coastal home where they were staying because Meghan called the paparazzi, which has been proven. She called and divulged her location so that they could get pictures. But this whole thing, in summary, is, I guess, basically correct, but it is a little bit manipulative because, as I pointed out in the Oprah interview videos, they leave out every time they talk about this story that part of why the security was being pulled was because those people lived in the UK, and if the borders were closing, it was only fair and reasonable to let them go home before they were unable to go home to their families, to their homes, to their pets, etc. It would be unreasonable and unacceptable to expect a full security detail to just basically permanently move to America for Harry and Meghan unexpectedly in the middle of a pandemic away from their friends and family when the job they signed up for was to be in the UK. So that being left out is kind of irresponsible. But that's not necessarily her fault. That's Harry and Meghan who always leave that out so that they can make it seem more dramatic and seem more victim-y than it really was, because there was valid reasons to pull the security at that point. Meghan then says about Tyler Perry, sometimes you can tell your life story to a stranger on a plane as opposed to some of the people that are closest to you, which really came across as it's much easier to exaggerate and to lie to someone who is a stranger on a plane than it is to people who are closest to you because they know the truth and they might poke holes in your story. And that is the thing with Meghan. One of the first red flags people had with her was that she wouldn't allow anybody from her actual family or actual past or any close friends attend her wedding because they may have spilled the beans or contradicted her tales that she had told not only Harry but the royal family. And here she surely did tell Tyler Perry quite a few falsehoods and exaggerated things, just as she did on Oprah. But she already covered all of this in the interview for Oprah. She reminds me with a firm smile and a wave of her hand that signals it's time to move on, which is rich when Harry and Meghan have continued to repeat the foolish, petty little issues, the small, tiny problems that they discussed in the Oprah interview. I'll link that playlist for you here. Go take a look. If you've never seen the Oprah interview, I was able to include some clips from it. She clarified that it was Kate Middleton who made her cry over the flower girl dresses. Yes, super important to mention that once again in the Cut article. It's as if the biggest problem Harry and Meghan have ever had in their lives was that some people cried in the lead up to the wedding. If that's your biggest problem, because you keep harping on it, it's the scab you choose to keep picking at, then you don't really have very big problems. And you should probably grow up just a tad. How ridiculous. Anyway, this was definitely not a fairy tale, but revealing all of it was their way of setting fire to a narrative that they didn't control and letting a new one emerge, but not really. Because all of this just highlighted their lies and their pettiness and sent them down a path of public self-destruction. They sabotaged themselves by putting out a narrative of only small problems coming their way and making mountains out of molehills, making all these little problems such big issues that they had to discuss it on Oprah, in Netflix, in this cut interview, in Spare, and in every single other interview they've ever done. So immature. And also what created this bubble of negativity around Harry and Meghan. No matter what they talk about, there's always this negative spin on it coming from them themselves. They view things negatively. They view things in this light of victimhood and problems that are just everything's so unfair and we've been so hard done by. And the public's never going to receive that well because we know the truth. And we also know, even if you haven't paid attention to the Sussex spiral of doom, you know that they are very privileged people. I found this next paragraph to be a bit of a shift in tone, a little bit more weird. The front doors are thrown open wide, as are the doors leading out to the backyard. She stands and smiles with the perfect level of warmth, the gleam of her teeth rivaled only by the shininess of her blowout. The heck is that? That's super weird. And I just think that at this point, this is one of those points where it seems like maybe the author was adding in a little bit of this over-the-top sarcastic tone, because that's just a really bizarre thing to put into an article. I would never want to write about someone I was interviewing if I liked them. I would never write that the gleam of their teeth was rivaled only by the shininess of their blowout. Like, how strange. So then they were talking about the mansion that they bought. Once again, just not taking any sort of a relatable approach to anything. Eventually purchased the property for $14.65 million. This whole thing, not only is it not relatable and coming across really self-indulgent and whatnot, but also like the story with the palm trees and whatnot, that's a private thing. It's not coming off good in an article, especially when they talk about privacy so much. You should really be keeping these relationship sorts of moments and these sorts of things private. You should. And there's a reason for that. Everybody has little anecdotes about their love stories or their relationship or their house and how it was perfect for them and stuff like that. But that's what you share with close friends at a dinner party or your family members when they come to see your house, or you just talk about it around the dinner table with your primary family bubble. You don't tell strangers in an interview that's going to be published to the public because it makes you look weird and out of touch. Gives the vibe of somebody who's really overeager to talk about themselves, very self-absorbed, but also awkward. Like the type of person who exclusively talks about themselves. They stop getting invites because it's boring. We all have similar anecdotes and similar stories, and hearing it nonstop from someone is just not stimulating conversation, and it's not fun to constantly hear somebody talk about their same boring stories of, oh, my kid did this, my kid did that, my house is like this, my husband's like this, my husband's like that. Unless you're really good friends, that type of stuff is really boring to hear somebody drone on about constantly, and even when you are good friends, it has to be reciprocal. And so in an interview, it just comes across really strange that this is what she chose to talk about and focus on, like come and have like a house tour here in my mansion and write about it and then expect it to come across as relatable to the readers. I don't know. It's just horrible. Once again, she refers to Meghan as a princess. She is not. And Meghan says that it's important to be thoughtful about how she's seen as a princess. She says, there are little girls that I meet and they're just like, oh my God, it's a real life princess. But her ambitions for herself are more than to marry into a position. She really needs to leave the, oh my God, a real life princess thing out of it because it just comes across terrible. It comes across really bad. And she's not exactly the best person to be pontificating on this subject because she has married into all of the opportunities that she now has had and that she has recently had. She did not work her way up to building something. She has used people to get where she's at, and she's used Harry and the title and all of the recent things that she has accomplished, even though they have failed, like Archetypes, the book, The Bench, which I reviewed recently. I'll link that for you here. All the things, this very interview wouldn't be happening if she hadn't married Harry. So yeah, it just doesn't come across good. It comes across kind of hypocritical and strange coming from somebody like Meghan in this situation, in this context. Then you'll love this part. Meghan's Harry, or H as she calls him in anecdotes, comes around at this part of the interview. And it's just unfortunate that Meghan, during this time of the interview, communicated such ownership over Harry that the writer literally writes Meghan's Harry when introducing Harry in the article. The day before, while Meghan was on the photo shoot for this issue, Harry had been left to his own devices, he tells me. You were gone for like 10 hours yesterday, he marvels to his wife. You know, most regular people are gone for 10 or more hours a day working. Tell her the first thing you said when you got back last night, he says, turning to me. As if this is going to be really impressive. Calm down. She said, I'm not a model. I was like, no, you are. Of course you can be a model. And she's like, I'm a mom. And it's like, you can be both, Harry says, earning himself so many points. Again, this is cringe. Find something better to talk about. Keep these private things to yourself. They just don't come across well in an article like this at all. And it also comes across really rehearsed, like Meghan wanted him to say this or something. It comes across contrived. It really, really does. Harry and the author then apparently walk by the shared home office that Harold and the Meg have, and he says, most people that I know and many of my family, they aren't able to work and live together, Harry says. He enunciates family with a vocal eye roll. How petulant. Never misses an opportunity to make a dig, does he? He could have just said that they collaborate really well together, or that he was surprised how much he likes working with Meghan. Or he could have just made it like, oh yeah, we work really well together, so we share an office, and I really enjoy that. Why make it about your family and say it like that, or people that you know, comparing yourself? This competition that's one-sided. He's the only one who cares to compare himself to other people every single chance he gets, and he's the only one who's constantly making digs at people, his family, every time he can. It just personifies his negativity. That he took a moment where he could have just highlighted the positives of having an office shared with his wife and the joys of working together, or how well they work together, and focused on just the positive. Instead, he turned it into a negative dig, like, yeah, most people I know can't even do this. Like, whatever, dude. It just makes him look small and petty. Like most things. We always knew the first few years of creating this new life from scratch were going to be the busiest, says Harry. Well, it's a startup, Meghan interjects. We were building a business during lockdown. And then Harry interjects, again, with everyone weighing in. If you do something, they criticize you. If you don't, they criticize you anyway. It's a lot, but... So they just interrupt each other constantly. They both have this sense of wanting to have their hands on the wheel. And even though this is an interview about Meghan, she invited Harry in to give anecdotes, and then she's interrupting him when he's trying to talk. That'll get old really quick, I'm sure. So then here we have another reference to the Meg's list of things that she needs to refute in the media that she always keeps and weaves in. Here it is, you guys. Here is the time that she weaves in something from her list for this interview. Remember, she was developing a series called Pearl for Netflix. It was going to be an animated series, and it got cut. And here she's weaved in her clap back that falls flat as usual. So far, there's been little consumable content out of Archewell. The author writes, very objectively. Good for her. Meanwhile, Archewell has had a leadership change as the company moves forward, one of many leadership changes over the time. But here, as you can see, she's trying to say that the media was unfair about Pearl. Really, it was a bland idea. It was a boring idea. It was something that wasn't going to get a lot of views. Even if it was a well-intentioned idea, it just simply wasn't going to get good viewership, as unfortunate as that is. And instead of just letting that be and saving face, she tries to act like Netflix thought it was a great idea. They wouldn't have axed it if it was a great idea. And then she also tries to push some of the responsibility for Pearl off, that it wasn't just her idea. But it was her idea. If things were going well, I guarantee she would have taken 100% credit for the idea. The couple has directly smashed rumors of a reality show, and Meghan explained there was a difference between a historical documentary and a reality docu-series. Well, Netflix was a poorly scripted piece of fiction, so it was not a historical documentary at all. Just like Spare, it should have been in the fiction aisle. There's enough lies and exaggerations and manipulations of the truth that's dangerous to do. I hope that is the sentiment people feel when they see any of the content or projects that we are working on. Hardly. In fact, everybody has only felt the contempt that Harry and Meghan feel for everyone and even sometimes each other. And on top of it, pushing this love story narrative so hard all the time is only coming back to bite them in the butt constantly now. And that's one of the main things that is currently haunting the Meg is the Salt and Pepper Get Passed Together, which is coming up next, and this greatest love story ever told and our love story. It doesn't come across good. It's not professional. It's not reading nicely for the reader. There's nothing interesting in here. It's all just a bunch of nothing. Like, people haven't gotten to see this side of my life because it's private. That's why. And it should stay private. You shouldn't have to tell people how great your love story is. It should just show up the way it does for Catherine and William. It's clear. It's not clear with Harry and Meghan. And she must have a degree of insecurity about that. And Meghan says, what's so funny is I'm not trying to be cagey. I don't read any press. Give it a rest, woman. Everybody knows you do. Then she says, it's really nice to be able to tell your own story, aka lies. Your own version of things, your version of things. It's ridiculous. They have proven to be very untrustworthy when it comes to the things that they say. They're usually exaggerated or not true or taken out of context to manipulate the narrative. It's a shame. But then abruptly, Meghan says, our eye contact is good. They're like looking into my soul. I stammer out an apology. I feel it. It's good. I'm like so excited to talk. I bet she is. I'm sure she is. But this is super weird. This woman is not your bestie. You guys are not hanging out. This is very socially awkward to drop mid-convo in a professional setting. This is Allison's job to come interview Meghan. It's very inappropriate, and she clearly made Allison uncomfortable because she apologized. Super awkward, super not cool. And now some might view this as a narcissistic power play to sort of put someone off guard or to create that sort of false bond feeling of like, oh, we have such a good bond, to try to get somebody on your side and make them write a shining, glimmering article about you that's like super positive. It could have been something like that, a form of love bombing, for example, or manipulation in that way to create that false rapport. But no matter the motivations, it's really inappropriate, really awkward, very socially strange to do that. Next, Meghan launches into a little story about Archie and manners. We always tell him, manners make the man. Manners, 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 manners. In one of those lessons, Meghan remembered something she'd learned at a young age from a friend's mom. Salt and pepper are always passed together. She said, you never move one without the other. That's me and Harry. We're like salt and pepper. We always move together. And that is something that's very much haunting her now. They don't always move together, and now it's just created, just like with the hand holding. That was one of many problems with holding hands constantly, was that it then creates a weird narrative in the media of speculation that there's problems anytime you're not holding hands. Just like anytime you're not doing every single event together, it's going to create that speculation. And so right now this has come back up in the news because Harry and Meghan are doing separate events, kind of trying this professional separation for whatever reason. We discussed it in a recent video, and it's creating more speculation about their private lives and their relationship because of statements like this that Meghan has made in the past. So that's yet another reason why it's important to not do that. These days, they are getting back out there together. Recently, Meghan says they took Archie to a birthday party for a classmate. Everyone was surprised they showed up. Really? Were they? I was in a bouncy castle and I saw this 1-year-old inside. Why is a 1-year-old in a bouncy castle? That is very dangerous. I was like, where's your mom? You're asking a 1-year-old? Where's your mom? They can't answer you. And this mom on the outside goes, oh, hi, I'm here. I wasn't sure if I should come in. She laughs. I was like, do you need your child? Of course you can come in. What the heck even is this story? Once again, it's a big nothing burger, pointless. Was it an excuse to say that they went to a kid's birthday party? Was it an excuse for Meghan to talk about how she's a better mom because she was in the bouncy castle? I don't know, but this is one of the weirdest, most unbelievable stories I've heard her say, because there's no way a mother in their right mind would have their 1-year-old in a bouncy castle with other adults and other children. A 1-year-old. And be standing on the outside? What? Makes no sense. A friend of Meghan and Harry's who rented out her ranch for them for the photo shoot, which we're going to be talking about in an upcoming fashion edition, says that I hope people take their foot off the gas a little bit on all the negative spin because they're really good people. Well, you know, they need to take their foot off the gas on all the digs and lies and exaggerations. Okay, that's what Harry and Meghan should do. Next, they touched on Meghan and Harry's return to the UK for the Platinum Jubilee, and Meghan, this is the part where people think she was giving some veiled threats about maybe putting more, anecdotes out there in the world. She says she found her old journals. She says, oh my gosh, this is what I was writing in my journal there, and here's all my socks from the time, and I brought back pants that I found. They're like $30 pants from Bowden, and I brought them back. It was so surreal. $30 pants. They had been criticized for using an exorbitant amount of taxpayer funds to renovate Frogmore Cottage, £2.4 million or $3.2 million. But Meghan says that the headlines made it seem like the renovations were more extravagant than they actually were, but the cost itself was accurate. So regardless of how extravagant the renovations were or were not, the cost was accurate, and it has since been repaid, allegedly. She says it was bittersweet revisiting the cottage, knowing that none of it had to be this way. Responsibility completely absent. Responsibility for what she did, all the bridges she burned, is completely missing from this segment here. By her own analysis, her problem stemmed from her being an American, not necessarily a Black American. She explains her desire to ask lots of questions and to never be involved with something she couldn't totally have her hands on seemed to violate an unspoken social norm. Well, you can't micromanage things. At this elevated roles like this is all about collaborations and teams and letting people guide you. And Meghan just was apparently unwilling to listen to any of the advice and not taking responsibility for that, not being like, it was a learning curve that I could have tried harder. That's part of the problem with Harry and Meghan. They've never admitted a mistake. Not once. And even the best of people make mistakes. And that's the sign of a good person. They're willing to admit that they had made a mistake. The reporting of their renovations was just part of the abusive press coverage. That's a little over the top, is it not? Is it not? They thought, this is yet another contradiction to things that they've said, their idea was they should just remove taxpayer funding from the equation because that would cause all the noise to stop. But that's not how it works, obviously. But also, that's not what Harry and Meghan were actually asking for. They were asking to have something completely different. She says that just because they were existing, they were upsetting the dynamic of the hierarchy. False. By being difficult, they were upsetting the dynamic of those working relationships in that job. She once again claims that she was not reinventing the wheel and lists a handful of princes and princesses and dukes who have the very arrangement they wanted. It's false. There is no member of the royal family who is a working member or a part-time working member who is also making their own income, especially not in show business. It's just not a thing. It says that for whatever reason is not something that we were allowed to do, even though several other members of the family do that exact thing. It's just not, that they were not doing the exact thing. So another manipulative lie here. And the author says, why do you think that is? Meghan says, why do you think that is? She says right back with a side eye that suggests I should understand without having to be told. This is implying something more serious. It's manipulative. This is implying exactly what Harry tries to weasel his way out of, saying Meghan never said that. She also describes Meghan as a clothes horse. Absolutely not. False. And then they circle back to Archetypes, which is the reason why this interview was granted or arranged. She says, it's so real. I feel different. I feel clearer. It's like I'm not finding my voice. I've had my voice for a long time, but being able to use it. This again, she uses this line all the time, and it's really, really old. At its heart, Archetypes' slogan, don't believe the type, is Meghan's way of grappling with questions that have plagued her personally. Why certain women get saddled with labels, why they stick long after they've been proved untrue. This should have stayed in the therapist's room. It's just not an accurate representation of what went on with Meghan and Harry. It's just not. She says a conversation that hovers between candid or planned it, when very clearly it's much more planned. The episodes were drab and boring to listen to. And then they talk about the labels that they were discussing in Archetypes: old maid, dragon lady, bimbo, crazy, angry black woman, B word. She clarifies and then squeals, ooh, I don't want to say that word. It makes me so uncomfortable. Ridiculous. She's in her 40s. And yet another word that she finds uncomfortable, how juvenile. Very strange choice in an article like this. Then she mentions the Lion King premiere, and this is another thing that has come back to haunt Meghan Markle. I had just had Archie. It was such a cruel chapter. I was scared to go out. A cast member from South Africa pulled her aside. He looked at me and he's just like light. He said, I just need you to know, when you married into this family, we rejoiced in the streets the same we did when Mandela was freed from prison. Okay. Peak cringe, also proven false. The only cast member from South Africa who was a male came out and said, I did not say that. Never. At all. And would never. And the whole of South Africa was quite offended. Super weird lie to include, super strange thing to say. The rest of the article is kind of wrapping things up. Apparently, she went with Meghan to pick up Archie from school. Seems weird for somebody obsessed with privacy to bring a journalist to pick up your kid from school. And they stopped and gave a brand new black backpack with granola bars, bottled water, and peanut butter crackers in it to an unhoused man on the corner. Her security detail handed it to him. Very odd thing to include in an article like this. Odd thing to do kind of in general on the way home from school like this. Just seemed a little set up. To a lot of people, I have no opinion on that. It just was kind of a weird thing to include in the article here. And weird that she brought the woman with to pick up her kid at all. I think that's a bit odd. Then she says she'd never be able to do school pickup and drop off without it being a royal photo call with a press pen of 40 people snapping pictures. Sorry, I have a problem with that, Meghan says. That doesn't make me obsessed with privacy. That makes me a strong and good parent protecting my child. Very snide and very false. How do you think Princess Catherine and Prince William are picking up their kids every single day after school without a press pen of 40 people taking pictures? Nobody gets pictures because there's rules against it in the UK. They're allowed to take pictures on the first day of school only. So this is just a flat out lie. And then Lilibet, unsmiling with watchful bright blue eyes, is brought out by her nanny. Oh, interesting. Then Meghan finishes the interview by saying, it's interesting I've never had to sign anything that restricts me from talking. I can talk about my whole experience and make a choice not to. Well, that would have been the right choice, to not talk about the experience at all. And she's asked, why doesn't she talk? And Meghan says she's still healing. Sure. Okay. I think forgiveness is really important. It takes a lot more energy not to forgive, and she pontificates on that for a moment. But really, it's Meghan who needs forgiving, not the other way around. Well, it's clear why this cut interview was not received very well and why it is still causing problems for Harry and Meghan today with these sorts of comments and these sorts of things that undermine their credibility a great deal. What did you think of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you next time. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye.